Live now. If we can give it a minute, there's always a delay. How have you been, by the way?
Good. How about you?
You've been busy. You're always so busy and doing so much stuff.
No, it's good.
Keeps you like happy. You're one of those kind of people you got to do stuff.
Yeah, or at least it feels, I don't know, like I'm accomplishing something in my life. Finally.
You are. You are. All right. We got a couple people watching. Hello, everyone. It's me, Forest Mommy. And this is Jacob. Is it Luria? Let's
Luria.
see.
Yep,
Do
you're right.
you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hey, everybody. My name's Jacob Luria. I am the current campaigns director for the Libertarian Party of Colorado, and I am also currently running for the state legislature here in Colorado for House District 27.
Which, guess what? I'm in that, I think.
Are you in 27?
I think
That's so
so.
exciting.
Yeah, so
I've
let's like
actually had
do
a
some
few
shit.
Yeah, I've actually had a few libertarians reach out to me. So it is a contentious state district for sure. Last week, actually, the Republican candidate dropped out, and I tried to convince the Republicans not to replace her, which they ultimately did. The Republicans were not really thrilled with the idea of not challenging Brianna Tadone here in 27. But
Oh yeah,
you know what?
that's who.
I
Yeah,
get
it's
it.
Brianna Tutone. That's who
Yeah.
it is.
Yep.
Which
Um,
you and me are like whatever. We don't care about that. But then she was trying to introduce those laws about plastic silverware. Did you see that?
Oh yeah, and she was behind. I don't know if she was the sponsor or the co-sponsor of a bill that would have added enormous amounts of chemical and other environmental testing that needs to be done on top of just fracking additional things that are just unnecessary. So, I mean, she's not. I'm the one thing I haven't seen from her, although I'm sure she is not a big gun fan. She doesn't seem to have introduced any of the anti-gun bills, but she has, of course, voted for them. So, you know,
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of especially in Colorado, all of my trans friends are pro gun out here. So maybe she is a little bit more pro gun.
there is a group I'm a part of. To help kind of facilitate this with the Libertarian Party. It's called the Pink Pistol Group. They are a pro-gun LBGT group in Denver, and the group is Denver. But from what I found, is the Facebook group of Denver kind of gets all around Colorado because there just aren't necessary, like there just may not be enough LGBT people like on the Front Range to have their own group. So they go to the Denver one. But I remember the first day I ever got on, they were like, the Holocaust happened because they took guns away from Jews, and I was like, wow, these people are incredibly based. I love your point of view already.
That's like such a basic thing. I had a Jewish roundtable one time, and that was like the first thing they're like, "Yeah, man, if they had guns back then,
I mean,
things would
Hitler
be
did
different."
disarm a lot of people with the idea that the army should be the only ones to have those weapons. Hitler was
Exactly.
actually a lieutenant or captain in World War One. He almost got kicked out of the army, I think, for just being a little raging
Shit.
maniac.
He's ridiculous. So hold on, I gotta let my dog out. He's driving me nuts. Sorry,
You're good.
everybody.
No,
Super profesh.
yeah, that's a fun fact of history, though.
No, this has been fun doing these little YouTubes with like the candidates because no one ever knows who's running. Around their.
Yeah, it's true. And honestly, I really appreciate it from the campaigns director. It is nice to have someone who has a podcast premiering our, candidates and helping out the Libertarian Party for sure. And I
Something
was
I
very
can
excited.
do.
The Libertarian Party did retweet your tweet about having this. So I thought that was very cool. Yeah.
The national did I was like,
Yep.
oh, I wonder if that was Angela. I wonder who did that. But
I
yeah,
don't
I
know, but
saw
it was
that. It
great.
was cool. But all the states, someone should be doing it in a lot of states because I don't know if you've seen because you are, you're busy and have a life and aren't on Twitter as much as I am. But like, there's all these fights about, in Florida, they don't want a libertarian to run against DeSantis and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but they don't even know that there's someone in their own neighborhood running for a House district or
Right,
something.
exactly. Or county, or I mean, you do have Maria Bueno, I think is if I pronounce her last name. I mean, she's done a great job in Florida. She's running a commissioner's race. Great job of getting out there. I actually don't know if you saw this. She created an OnlyFans, and her only 4 videos
I
are
did see
talking
that.
about how corrupt the politician who she's running against is. So that's great, but not everyone does that. And this is one thing I have found out myself, being the campaigns director and also running now as a candidate. Part of the reason I'm doing it is, we have to spread libertarian ideas. I don't know, in a three-way race if I can win, although I'm going to run to win. But I want to get a sense for, I've always been a person who sometimes needs to do things myself or experience things myself to understand the truth of what's out there. And I need to have a grasp for my own of how our ideas do and how do they do, not in an editorial or on a podcast, but how does it do face-to-face talking with somebody? Because what I found, at least in Colorado, any libertarians listening who don't know the political system in Colorado, we do have a caucus system, and we are lucky enough that in the 90s they passed the minor party law, which grants minor parties like the Libertarian Party full ballot access on any, as long as we nominate candidates and follow the proper forms, we get candidates on the ballot. And what we've often had, and there's a meme I'm sure you often see of libertarian ideas versus libertarian candidates. And, it's online, it's one thing, but I want to get a sense of what people feel in real life. And in Colorado, we've had decent success, not necessarily winning elections, but for example, the candidate who ran before me in 27, I don't know how much campaigning he did. He still got 3,700 votes. So my
Okay.
thought is, what can a candidate do here who actually has some time to knock doors? I don't quite have the money to compete against the Republicans and Democrats, although it's funny. The Republican I talked to told me I would need to raise $100,000 for this race. Brianna has raised $25,000, and the Republican who dropped out had only raised about $5,000. So, the person that they have, though, they run a Christian school. And the one thing I'm hoping, at least with this Republican candidate, is we can agree on how Colorado just screwed up the COVID situation. As a Christian school, it wouldn't surprise me if their school joined that lawsuit against Jared Polis. So we actually do have a new member here in Jeffco, Merle Hendrickson. Big shout out to Merle. He is my campaign director. He got shut out and pushed out of the Republican Party and has been very happy to join the Libertarians. His church was one of those churches that joined that lawsuit. So,
is the Republican, the Faith Bible Church? Are they with that one, the big one in Urbana?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. I read just an article about it. And of course, I also I screenshotted a picture of just me and Brianna on Ballotpedia because I knew it wouldn't last very long. So, keep that for posterity.
Nice. Oh yeah, someone asked what your stance on gun rights is. I'm sure you'll.
I am. I think saying that I'm a Second Amendment advocate is not quite going far enough. I am probably more of a believer in your right to self-defense than even a lot of Republicans are. I don't have any problem with any type of weapon or firearm that you own. I think pretty much if the government can own it and use it, I think you can as a citizen. And people will say, you really think people should own tanks and jets? Yeah, I think, you can. I don't think most people will, because you still need some kind of training to use that, where it's much easier to learn how to use a firearm, at a gun range, by yourself or with a little bit of help. You need training. But people forget that when this country was founded, there were privateer navies and things like that. People did own cannons. It's not a unreasonable thing. So,
Yeah.
And I think then in terms of what your self-defense weapon is really probably depends on where you live and what's best for you. I live in a building with 4 other apartments, so I'm probably not going to be using any sort of real high caliber because I don't want it to go through a wall like I have, 9mm. But if I had land with a lot more land, I probably own all sorts of different things. I know out here, coyotes, mountain lions are a huge thing. To be honest with you, I don't go hiking anymore unarmed. I've seen too many stories. I saw that video of the guy here in Colorado being chased by a mountain lion, and all I can think of is, man, if you had a 10mm, you don't need to shoot the mountain lion. It's more just scaring it away. And this guy had to run, and I was thinking, man, if you just had something to defend yourself. So,
although did you live out here when the guy in Golden attacked the He
I was
attacked the
I was in Colorado, I wasn't in Golden, I was in
Okay.
Denver at the time, but I will tell you, in my neighborhood when I lived in Denver, it started to get a little bit sketchier and sketchier, where I don't know if I heard gunshots or fireworks, but whatever it was started to go off a lot more, and the crime rate has risen, and granted, on the grand scheme of things, when you quadruple the homicide rate and your homicide rate was 2, it doesn't seem that massive. But I know here in Golden, property crimes are becoming huge. And that is one
Ooh.
area that I think in Jeffco and other parts of Colorado, libertarians need to figure out how to address this, because the only ones who are really addressing it are Republicans. And excuse me if I don't trust Republicans to completely fix the issue, because I've talked to some Republicans whose attitude is you just need to empower the police in any way they want to be empowered. And I'm not against the fact that we changed qualified immunity here in Colorado and lowered it. I think, I get the point of, if you're having a shootout, like I get when banks were robbed and people had these massive shootout with gangs. I understand accidents, and it's sort of like surgeons, right? You have huge malpractice insurance because humans make mistakes. It doesn't mean people shouldn't be surgeons, but you need something like that to be able to hold them responsible. And most Republicans won't tell you or don't know that my favorite president, Calvin Coolidge, who is the most underrated president in the entire United States, he is the reason why police and other public officials like that cannot strike, because he considered it. He was the governor of Massachusetts, and the Boston police went on strike, and he basically made that illegal. Not one for much, the government telling you to do things, but he did rein in his own government employees by basically saying, you are here to protect and serve the citizens. You can't just go on strike whenever you want and let whatever happen. So
Yeah, there's something weird about the whole like public sector unions too. Like there's just like it feels a little weird with teachers. I'm like, okay, the government pays teachers, and then the teachers pay the union, and the union works with the government, and it's just like weird. And same with the
yeah,
cops,
and I
obviously.
and I feel like even with the teachers unions, I got to imagine a lot of these teachers lose out. Like, I'm not against the idea of collective bargaining on a voluntary setting. I tell people this all the time. Like, as a capitalist, I think people underrate the amount of power they truly have as an employee sometime. I granted, you don't want to put your employers always in bad situations, but if you either negotiate right or even put on the right pressure or whatever, I'm not against people inherently striking or voicing their
Right.
opinion. I just don't like that or public sector unions seem to have such a power. They get scratched with the government's back in a way that other, even private sector unions, don't really get to do.
Yeah, it's just another layer of government too. Like I try to tell people that too. Like, yeah, I understand that some employers are shit, and sometimes you have to like come together. But like, if you like, they were like rejoicing that these kids were or people are getting like Starbucks unionized and stuff, and I'm like, okay, now you're just paying someone else money for you to say, hey, like it just from that sense too, as a cheap capitalist, like
Yeah, and
why?
don't get me wrong, I probably wouldn't join a union personally. I will admit I'm not a huge fan of unions. When people say they had their place in America, that's kind of true. People also
Yeah,
don't
back in the
really
day.
remember how violent unions also were. Like, the original May Day that got started in Europe was like a violent protest, if I remember. And that's why we have May Day, because the European government's attitude was, we will give workers one day. And if they give them that one day, maybe they won't, resist. Although when you look at France, it seems like their pastime is protesting their government, which I can't completely be mad about. But that being said, I have no problem with voluntary groups. I mean, that's what I would put
Yes.
forward as libertarians, is why I think we're really the only hope for this country, is we're the only ones right now actually pushing. And I know there are a lot of libertarians for national divorce, and I'm not necessarily against that idea. I think it needs to be thought of carefully, and I think you need to decide what regions would be best, and people need to really be in the mindset for it. But I also think if we're going to stay together as a country, we're the only hope, because I think we're the only ones who can really teach people how they can live with each other without necessarily agreeing with each other.
We're a good example. Like we're a good example of that, and just like how to cooperate with people, how to accept people, or even if you don't fucking accept them, it's not like it doesn't have to be this huge issue, right? Like,
Yes, I mean, our national secretary put up a picture the other day of, it was a grown person in a baby outfit, and it said, I don't have to accept your lifestyle, but I will not send the government after you to stop it. And that's the
Yeah.
most important thing. That's my argument to Republicans on drugs and prostitution and all these other things. Is there are a lot of it I don't like, and if I have a daughter, I don't really want her to become a sex worker, to be honest with you. But putting these people in jail is clearly not making their lives better and keeping them in, in the system. And we have so many issues of nonviolent offenders going to prison with violent offenders, and then they get out and commit actual violent crimes.
Yeah, they're institutionalized at that point, and they become worse. Because that's what I said on my stream on Sunday. The most, people are anti-gun. I'm like, where the most violent place in the world is prisons, and they still are hurting each other like constantly. So they don't come out good, and you put people in with a
Yep.
nonviolent crime,
And I do think the gun thing is a little bit of a culture. It is the same mentality that the anti-gun people have, where they just want to change the culture of the country. I think we need to push the culture back in the opposite direction. It's interesting, you talk to some older baby boomers, or I think the silent generation, the great generation, and they'll tell you how many high schools had gun ranges in their basement. People had had rifles in their trucks and went to school. Clearly, there is something that has sort of changed and gone on in society that caused people to do this. And I even had an argument with my fiance's cousin, who said, okay, well, if nothing else, if I leave every other gun thing available, what if you just compromise to give up AR-15s? Because they are specifically the gun used in these school mass shootings. And my argument back to him was, when we do that, what are you going to say when it becomes, I don't know, some other popular rifle that is owned? It's just going to change to something. And Virginia Tech, which was the most lethal school shooting, I think, in American history, was done with pistols, was done with handguns. And ultimately, they're going to come after all of that stuff next. I mean, I wrote a tweet a long time ago that, as soon as they go after these gun manufacturers and they're successful, they'll go after gun stores next. Because gun manufacturers, they can sue the gun manufacturers for lots of money, but it won't stop these shootings. And the next thing is they'll go to these gun stores and they'll say, well, didn't you really pay attention to this guy? Do you really think he should have had a gun? And the ultimate answer is, there are weird people who are of no harm whatsoever. I am kind of one of those weird people. I am loudly weird, so people are less intimidated by me, and I am glad about that fact. But I know quiet people who are weird, who don't want to harm people and want to leave people alone. And also, armed minorities are harder to oppress. So
and there's like
what
this
can I say?
attitude that's all over, just because they'll say, oh, well, if they use those guns in mass shootings, and then you're like, well, yeah, but I still want to be armed to protect myself from people who maybe would do that. And they're
Right.
like, well, what, are you a scaredy cat? So like, there's this like disconnect of like, we should be scared of people having guns, but then if you want to defend yourself, like it just doesn't make any
And I mean,
sense.
let's look at the shootings that have happened in Colorado, right? Because people will say, oh, you have all these guns in Colorado. And I'm sure there are maybe some shootings I'm not thinking about, but the high profile shootings in Colorado, Columbine, I do not believe that there were any armed security in Columbine whatsoever. That theater in Aurora, most theaters will tell you, because they are national corporate chains, you are not allowed to carry. I mean, the theater I work at technically does not allow you to carry, you know, and I'm sure there are people who do conceal carry who come there, but technically you are not allowed to. The grocery store shooting in Boulder, I mean, they are the most anti-gun
That one was
area
so
in
weird.
Colorado.
And that one was
Right.
so weird.
The crime is going up and the shootings are going up in Denver, also a very anti-gun place. All of the major, I mean, people make fun of Lauren Boebert's restaurant, which is now, I hear, closed down because all the waitresses open carried. I mean, honestly, those waitresses are probably safer. I work at a place in a side job, and I won't bring it up just because, for keep their
Don't dox
identity safe.
yourself.
Right, exactly. But there is a second job I have, and I noticed the second day, both of my managers conceal carry. And my attitude is I feel just a little bit safer at that place. And not that I think anything's ever going to happen, but I know now nothing will happen. In fact, my manager has a come take it bumper sticker on his coffee mug. So, yeah, I
At
had
least
to
there's a
hand
better
him.
chance to
Right,
like.
I gave him one of our print guns, not money flyers that we printed for the LPCO. We also do lpco.com or lpco.org. We have two merch stores. One is the national, but one is our own state merch store. We just put up a new T-shirt that says "Print guns, not money."
Nice.
Yep.
Very good. Yeah, that like it's weird too, especially like when they bring up the abortion debate, they bring up rape and stuff, and you're like, okay, well, let's arm people so there's less rapes and all that, and they still just like can't connect that kind of stuff. Where you're like, maybe people caring is just a little, but
And it does,
uh,
that does, I understand, come along with people being responsible and people training. And that's my attitude of changing the
yeah.
culture is it's not that I want everyone to become this raging gun fanatic that owns 30 guns. Although if I had
Well,
more
who
money,
can
I would
afford it in
probably.
this economy? Who could
Right,
afford it?
exactly. And honestly, if you handed me like 5 grand tomorrow and said this is only for guns and ammo, I'd probably spend the majority of it on ammo and maybe buy one other firearm. Like ammo is definitely what you want. But you want to change the culture in an aspect where people want to become responsible with firearms. I mean, my fiance having them now in the apartment, she's become a lot more comfortable around them. And I also try and be responsible about it in the house. I try and not act a little too, wild or whatever. But she's now at the point where her attitude is, I want to become so prepared with that firearm that if someone comes into this apartment, it is not even a second thought I can use that thing, which I give her credit because there are a lot of gun owners that are not even quite at that level. I mean, I think most of us are not, it's not secondhand, knowledge. I mean, you need to get out in the range a lot to do that. But I think people need to do that. And I think encouraging people to learn how to be safe with it and take that stuff responsibly. And it's also not understanding gun culture. When I first got into firearms, if you go on YouTube, I mean, there are firearm videos that don't have anything to do with how to fire firearms that will tell you the firearm safety rules up front. Anything you do, it will tell you the rules up front. Make sure you are not just pointing your firearm at someone, even if it's not loaded, right? Like you want to make sure, like anything that you're pointing at, you're only pointing that firearm at something, that will, that you want to obliterate. You want to know what your target is and what is beyond it. Basic things like that, they will tell you because we all want people to be safe. And we understand that they are dangerous things. Guns are not the most harmless thing. So you want to show that you are responsible for, with it. But
Right.
I also think the people who are generally responsible are not the ones committing a lot of these atrocities or
Exactly.
like it's like January 6th, right? Like was that all stupid? Absolutely. But people talk about it being this violent insurrection. I guarantee those group had a ton of firearms at home. And yes, it is stupid. Do not ever go to Washington, D.C. with firearms. The federal government will arrest you. They will put you in jail for the rest of your life, prison, and they will not bat an eye. But that being said, if 10,000 Trump supporters actually showed up with firearms, that would have been an entirely different day.
Right.
But ultimately they didn't even need to bring in the National Guard. It was a lot of people who I think got in over their heads. Some people were stupid. I don't know who Ray Epps is. That's a really good question. We'll never really know. But
We'll never
I'm not going
know
to get you
because
kicked off of YouTube for saying that, right? I
it's
realize are
fine.
there any like
It's,
rules I really should know? I
I'm
watch
not
like enough.
monetized yet, so
Okay, I watch enough YouTube podcasts that I generally know sort of what to say and what not to say, but I should ask just in case. I don't want your stream to get shut down.
I think we're fine. No, and like you were saying with the gun culture too. Like I remember back in the day, if any girls got into guns, and the other girls would be like, "Oh, she's a pick me," blah blah blah, and it's like, no, she's just learning how to defend herself. Like we do have to change this. Like, and that's why I like always bring up when they bring up abortion. I'm like, guess who else likes gun control? Is rapists, who we're always saying like that's why we need to push it. So it's like there's all these
Mm-hmm.
connections. But it is like a weird thing, like I said earlier, the attitude of like self defense is bad because they don't like gun people, but it's everybody's into guns now too. Like it's
Well, I think a little bit of it has stemmed. And this is only studying history, and I could be completely wrong about this. My own feeling is part of it has stemmed from the generally safe society that we have created. I mean, we are a little bit removed from the man versus nature. I mean, we still have weather and climate and stuff to deal with, absolutely. But in terms of like, you don't really live in a world anymore where you are worried about like being attacked by wolves because you are going through the woods from town to
right,
town, right? We are very, I mean, even highways are extremely safe. We don't have, I mean, there is theft and stuff, but you don't get robbed by bandits on highways anymore. That's just not a thing that happens. And so I think we've removed ourselves from enough of these dangers that people just don't feel like they need this stuff anymore. until something happens. I worked with a coworker in my past job where she got mugged and attacked in downtown Denver, and she came in the next day and wanted to know how to use a pistol and a firearm. And my buddy, who is going to actually be in my wedding, is one of my groomsmen. He was in the army, so he went over a lot of information with her. But he had an ex-girlfriend who went on a road trip around the country, and he gave her his 45. He's like, just in case. And you know what? She brought it back and she said, I'm really glad I had this the entire trip. Made me feel
just in case.
just a little bit safer. Yeah, I mean, for women, I have no problem with women being armed. I also, though, don't have interest in like sexually assaulting women. So maybe that's part of it. But I think women should absolutely be armed. They used to have, in like the early 1900s or 1800s, women had these long hairpins that were about that big, and they were meant for stabbing people. Someone gets too close to you, you pull that out of your hair and you stab them. And you want to put men in their place, make men afraid of raping women.
Yeah.
Truly. I mean, like, that will give you the power.
And they'll say, oh, well, the bad guy can get her gun. And I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe, but at least she had a chance there for a minute. Like, they just always...
And you know what? A lot of men who do sexually assault women, like you find this obviously in the realm of when people do use date rape drugs, those men are cowards and usually don't like physical confrontation. They're doing it and picking on women that they think they can get away with it with and have power over. I mean, like, no, right? Like, men don't find like female UFC fighters and try and rape them because they know they'll get their asses handed to them. So, I bet you there are a lot of men who would be, they prey on women because they're cowards and they will run away if presented with a firearm. So, and there are little hand cannons you could buy that you can keep in your purse. So you don't even need to pull it out. You can just
go pow pow. All right. So what's the campaign plan?
So ultimately, I am trying to do a few things. The first thing I'm trying to do is raise about $600 off the bat. I found I can print about 10,000 door pamphlets with those. So the first thing I'll do is I'll obviously hit up the libertarians in our district first, like you, talk to them.
I'm in, and I'll volunteer for you too. You hit me up.
That would be great. Being able to get some door knockers. And I think we need to get our message out there. Ultimately, this election cycle for us is more of seeing where we fall in Colorado and where voters do like us, where they don't. I mean, our district that we live in, the majority of people are over 55.
So and like more blue collar. It's definitely more blue collar. And
yes. And honestly, Brianna in 2018 won the election by 437 votes. And then in 2020 re-won by maybe 2,000. And the Libertarian got 3,700. So, and this was something the Republicans brought up with me. They said, you spoil races. And that's not completely untrue. But my attitude is I'm not a Republican anymore because I did not like the way the Republican Party was run. We're in this two-party system where these parties truly take your vote for granted. And it not even becomes a, hey, we really want to win and beat the other party. I mean, they truly are. The woman in Jefferson County who I talked to, a Libertarian spoiled her race in 1999, and she clearly has never gotten over it. And I don't know what to tell you. You don't just get my vote because I don't like Democrats. I truly, the party, not the voters themselves, but the Democratic Party, I really don't have use for. They spend an insane amount of money in politics and then say everyone else spends money. They are the darkest of dark bunny parties. That being said, the Republican Party is just completely really incapable of doing a lot. And they have so many different ideologies in their own party. It's I don't know. And the Libertarians do too, but there are some principles at least that we agree on, right? Like we run candidates and our attitude, even the new people we're bringing in, like the new Republicans who've joined us, for example, in this state, there are certain things you have to agree on: private property rights, right to self-defense, freedom of choice and what to put in your own body. Even if you don't like marijuana, you have to accept not putting people in jail for it. I don't need to make it legal. And I can understand the argument that legalizing certain things is the government saying we approve of you doing these things, but you can decriminalize things and not put people in jail for it, So, and I think that's ultimately the better way to go. And running on certain issues, obviously crime is something we're going to have to figure out as the Libertarian Party. This is why I think also firearms are important. is being able to defend your property. I do think you should be punished if you steal someone's property. I'm sorry. We are the number one state for having catalytic converters
Yeah,
being stolen.
the car
Yeah,
stuff's out of
it's
control.
it's insane. And we need to be able to let police recover that stuff, recover people's property. I I don't, privatizing the police may work. I don't really know. Of all the things that I think we should privatize, police might be the last on my list, and I'm sure I'm going to get some hate from other libertarians for that. And I'm not saying I'm against it, guys. Like, if we could privatize everything, I am absolutely behind that. Don't get me wrong. But just in the scale of what things should be privatized, which then leads me to education. In Jefferson County, education is hugely important. Our schools are hemorrhaging students, and the funding is not going with those students. It is staying in these public schools. And I think we need to really branch out with education. We really stick ourselves into government school, charter school, Christian private school here in Colorado. And there can be variety. I mean, I want a true education revolution, true education freedom, where maybe it's four neighborhoods banding together and funding a small building where some teachers are teaching their students. Maybe it is a big school where you have public schools where entire towns fund a school, but it doesn't come with government money and government stipulations. Every time government money comes to a school, it always comes with stipulations no matter what. And I thought liberals understood this when Trump was president and Betsy DeVos was in charge of education and everyone hated Betsy DeVos. But now it's the other way, and people will fall overhead for the teachers' unions. These are teachers' unions, by the way, that let your schools be shut down, sacrificed your kids' learning during COVID. And it's not like it's not like all of them were at home too. Plenty of teachers did suffer, but you had an administrator, I don't know in what school district, who zoomed into a meeting from like Cabo or something on the beach while your kids are masked I mean, I never realized how much of developmental issues students could have until COVID happened, when you kept these kids indoors. And I still see kids masked. It breaks my heart really when kids are masked and I don't see their parents masked. If the whole family is masked, it's not great, but at least you're all living under the same kind of vibe. But these teachers unions and the people who run them are happy to sacrifice your children. And I get it. Unions are there to protect the workers. And uniquely in school, they're supposed to be about kids, but they're not. And I think
the kids should have a union. There should be a union for kids or something, right?
Hey, I don't know if you've ever seen the Newsies, but it was about newspaper kids in the early 1900s in New York. They formed a newspaper union to fight against William Randolph Hearst, who was one of the dirtiest journalists. That's why when people talk, like Trump brought up fake news and people got mad at him, he may somewhat be wrong in a lot of things that he says, but the fake news is not wrong. William Randolph Hearst was one of the dirtiest journalists in U.S. history. We got into the Spanish-American War because the U.S. Maine blew up, because gunpowder blew up on the ship, and he said that the Spanish attacked our ship and drove us into war. It was called yellow journalism at the time, but we don't really think about that. So,
no,
but
that's
kids
normal.
Yeah, and maybe we need to branch out in education, where I do think kids need to learn how to write, kids need to learn how to read, kids should learn basic math. But we push kids into this higher education that they don't need. Now we're dealing with a student debt crisis issue that no one really knows how to deal with. And and I understand, I don't want a bunch of people who did pay for college or didn't go to college paying for other people's debt. I also do understand, though, the people who have that debt. Maybe there's a way to compromise of that on, maybe if you've at least paid off what you've borrowed, you don't need to pay off all the interest. I don't know. I will admit I am I go to people way smarter than me for economics, but I am speaking as a person who did struggle in public school, who is an auditory learner. I did not learn great with how the schools taught us. And in New York, we do more state testing than any other state. At least we did. And all we taught was for the testing. And it's funny, after I got through school, students behind me, there were extra projects I got to do in school. Like, hey, we finished teaching everything that we need to teach you for the state test. Let's go on to this other project. They added so much more state testing. The teachers weren't able to do this. When I was in 8th grade, our English teacher had us take A Midsummer Night's Dream and rewrite these scenes in more plain English, and we got to videotape them. And it was a super fun project. And every class from the year before had gotten to do something like this. Every class after me was not able to, because they had more testing that they had to prepare for. And it's just silly. You go to college for these things you don't need to go to college for. And I went to school for theater. I would argue you don't need that. I could have learned everything I needed from going and working at a school. And it's true, as an actor, you don't ever play an actor on stage, but you can learn about other fields from not necessarily sitting in school and wasting thousands of dollars.
Right.
Some
Yeah.
people
Well,
do
and
need that, but you know,
I always bring up there when they're like, okay, we need to have public school for it's a community investment, blah blah. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we all invested in that, and they didn't even teach them how loans work or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, there's just all these things where
and
it's like,
that's my point. Is it's a government school, and the government did not prepare children or any of us properly as it should have. That's why I do push people on the government versus public, because yes, if a town is getting together or neighborhoods are getting together to fund stuff, that's fine, but then the parents in the community have more control. And I'm not against parents and teachers communicating with each other, but I don't think teachers get unilateral right over children. And I understand of having community places for children who have terrible and bad parents, but to be honest with you, a lot of these schools don't help kids who have terrible parents, not in all the right ways that they should. I don't know. I just don't
well,
think it's the
then
best.
they bring in CPS, which half the time is like the government, and that makes it worse. And then the kids get lost, and we're like, there is that, like, the utopian. If it's a community, then people will see this kid's hurting from their kids or whatever, and it'd be easier to
Exactly.
come stay with us. You're not going to get lost in some bureaucratic thing. And
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, from my understanding, that's part of the reason why the foster system is so bad, because it's just the bureaucracy around it is terrible. And also, we don't always allow a lot of free thinking with kids. I remember when I went to school, there were certain things that we didn't talk about or certain things that weren't brought up. Interesting example in the election of, I think, 1887, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. That was an election that was stolen from the Democrat, interestingly enough. And everybody knew it, but the New York Times wrote an article saying, we think this election, we don't know what's happened to the election, and colluded with the Republican Party. And we don't talk about that in school, which you think we would, especially after like 2020. We would bring up whether you believe the election was stolen or not going to comment on that. It's more the point of, we think these things don't happen in the US, and there's history of this stuff happening in the US, and we don't really talk about it. And growing up in New York, you don't learn a lot that would put the government in a bad light whatsoever. And then you get older and you learn about these things like Waco or other things, and you think, wow, maybe were the people living on Waco maybe a little bit crazy. I don't know. I'm Jewish, so sometimes when you deal with more Christian fundamentalists, it is an interesting conversation. But if they're living on their own, doing their own thing, I can't necessarily be bothered by it. And our government, one thing being a libertarian has shown me, man, and as someone who used to be a Republican, saying this is maybe one of the hardest things that I had to come to grips with. But the U.S. government and the organizations that work for it truly are the largest terrorist organization on the planet. And we have done far worse things to people and our own citizens than individual groups. Interesting story I saw the other day. In the early 90s, when the Aryan Nation was fizzling out of America, they were in 5 states. The FBI funded the Aryan Nation after the Oklahoma City bombing from 1994 to 1998, and increased the Aryan Nation presence from 5 states to 15 states. They paid for national conventions of the Aryan Nation. They would fund hundreds of dollars to these people so they could keep an eye on them. So the FBI is single. So when you see the FBI talking about the rise in hate groups in this country, bet you $10 it's because of the FBI. And I tell, like, getting into January 6th, I tell my friends who were like big Black Lives Matter fans, this is something you should be worried about, because what are you going to do when there are peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters, like some of them in Seattle or Portland, who just got picked up in unmarked vehicles in the night? No trial, no public arrest by people on badges or anything like that. Just boom, picked them up in the middle of the night. And even if you do commit a crime, that's not a place I really want to go in this country. As Michael Malice does like to say, even the Stasi were nice enough to knock on your door.
It's true.
You gotta be careful, because as someone who may not always be known, everybody who's involved in Black Lives Matter, there may have been people who got arrested just like January 6th. Not people who burned down stores or destroyed property, but general peaceful protesters who did just get arrested, and no one knows about them. You know,
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like you never really care until it happens to you.
that's true. I was just gonna say something about the teaching thing. So out here in
Yeah.
Colorado, we had the Japanese internment camps,
Yep.
and I took extra history out here. I never once learned about them.
Oh, really?
In
We did
in
in
4 years of high school, I know other states did,
Yeah,
but
in New York, we definitely did. That's very and in New York, I will say, like, we're always pretty open about a lot. The only thing that's bad about New York is because it is run by Democrats, they don't really want to tell you any of the negative Democrat history. Like, I didn't know the Ku Klux Klan was started by the Democratic Party, but they'll tell you all the things about Republicans. But I noticed that in red states, they won't always bring that up. So, I mean, I think history needs to be taught, and I think it needs to be taught because I do really truly believe that America was founded on the idea of that the individual was important and that was a goal we were striving for in the United States. And you have to learn about the times we did not live up to that to learn how we can live up to that as a nation.
yeah, because we're like the last place for it, basically, too. Like,
That really is the thing is if if America goes, you have nowhere else. And I talked to a guy recently who spent a lot of years living in Europe, and he said the one thing about America, about American culture, is it's truly a culture of freedom, and you don't really find that everywhere else in the world. Most people are willing to compromise, but every American has somewhere they're not willing to compromise. Left, right, middle, whatever. There are rights you believe in that you will not compromise on, and I think that's an important thing.
yeah, that's true.
I
Just
mean,
gotta get everyone to understand it's the government. That's the problem.
I typically agree. This is one thing I do really believe. I do agree with and believe is that if we lower the size of at least our federal government, if not our states as well, and push this stuff as locally as we can, I do think it will continue to drive us apart because you have so little power with the federal government that if you feel like every 4 to 8 years, half of the country is, I remember when Trump was elected, I was working on a show with a girl who legitimately was crying because she thought that government agents were going to come and arrest her mother because her mother was gay. And it might be, like you might be ridiculous. Like, and I did think it was
She
a little
believed
ridiculous.
it.
I will admit at the time, but like she truly believed that. And that is scary for someone that you truly think your government is out to get you. And in some way, people are not wrong. I mean, if you step out of line, they certainly will, but we need to get away from that. We need to reform these intelligence agencies. Most people don't know that the CIA was not formed by an act of Congress. It was formed from a separate group that acted during World War II on their own. They were mainly a bunch of rich Americans who wanted to play spy. One of them actually spent taxpayer money to buy an ocean liner to travel across the Atlantic. And he did this I think it was like a week or 2 days before World War II actually ended.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
So, and then they created the CIA. And it's interesting if you get into people like my dad, for example, who's paid attention to politics his entire life, never knew what MK Ultra was so shocked when I told him what MK Ultra was. And I
yeah.
just can't get behind this stuff anymore. At least Congress, like hate them as much or love them as much as you like. At least those buffoons are on television. At least you know what
Yes.
they are doing on a day to day. Like you can at least contact them. They may not listen to you, but you can at least contact them and tell them they're a crappy person or a wonderful person. And our current congressman here in 7, to his credit, when all of those $1,200 checks were going out, it took forever to get mine. And I kind of got a little, I got a little annoyed. And I called him and I was like, you know what? I don't even know if you can do anything about this. There's a guy named Garrett who works for his office. So if Garrett ever sees this, you are the man, Garrett. Good job. You are worth what you're paid. But I was annoyed and I was like, I don't know if you can do anything. And he said, actually, we can. Give us a little bit of time. And sure enough, they called me back the next day. And then within a week, I had my $1,200 check. So,
Oh,
at
nice.
least you can call your congressman. You can contact people in the FBI. You can't and you read all these examples and you read it in government education too. How many children get abused? This is one thing people don't know. More children are molested in the public education system in the United States than were molested in the Catholic Church.
Yep. That's true.
Which is a large number because the Catholic Church molested a lot of children. This is at least one thing I can say about the Jews. Do some of the Hasidics maybe sometimes go a little bit too far? Yes, but also they don't bother anybody, man. This is one thing you all can take and learn from the Jews. We know how to leave people alone and trade and get along with everybody. Just saying.
And start the whole like there someone's saying like how the kosher label is like it's kind of a private thing, and they're like, why can't we
Yeah.
do that instead of the FBA and all that sort of stuff, and just have these private like stamps of approval from private groups?
That's my attitude, especially with like even medications and things like that. How, or and you can have this with schooling. I had a conversation with our governor candidate, Kevin Rukuski. He is a teacher at a private Jewish school, and he's developing a whole education plan right now that if he were governor of where to and I, it's not a plan of we're immediately just going to cut all this funding out from the schools. It's a we're going to change and rearrange this funding and the way that it works and the way that it goes. And one thing we've talked about is how we collect all this marijuana money for schools and none of it goes to schools. It's all sitting in
Yeah.
a reserve in the state government. They bamboozled the state citizens here and people. You talk to people in the state and they don't realize how anti-cannabis of a state Colorado really is. And honestly, the Libertarian Party wins. You know what our governor would do if our governor wins? He would personally write checks to all of these schools, and the Libertarian Party would spend the first 100 days handing out checks to teachers, to schools, and to principals. And if the federal government wants to come and arrest us for funding schools with our own tax money, I invite them to. Nothing would make me happier than the federal government, than the DEA trying that crap in Colorado. Bring it. Because that's what we need. That's what we need to be doing. Like these are the radical things that libertarians would do, and you can get the government out of no stipulations comes with this money. This is your money you have paid into the cannabis market here in Colorado, and we're just going to send it back to you. I know me personally, not to give too much information, but I know I have paid enough in cannabis taxes to fund schools myself. I would have been better off writing a check myself and then going to a classroom and handing it to a teacher because they know at least how to use it better. And I
Right,
think
it's
we need
true.
more transparency in schools. I do know some teachers, and it's funny, not all of them. Some teachers are very much for school choice, but my fiance's dad's new wife, she was a teacher in Virginia for years, and one of the first things I asked her, "Are you for school choice?" And of course, she's not, because that would have threatened her job. But my attitude is, if you are a good teacher, and I've had lots of teachers over the years who were, you theoretically will survive this stuff. I mean, and it doesn't mean you still can't have certain unions fighting for you in schools or, whatever, but the union can't be attached to the government anymore. And we need parents to be able to choose where to send their kids. You may not like how someone educates their child, but you sort of have to deal with that. And the left can make the same argument to the right of if Muslims want to have a religious Muslim school, they can do that. Although it is
Yep.
funny in America, the religious rights attitude toward Muslims, I notice, have changed. The more that they feel they are battling the non-religious in this country, the less they talk crap about Muslims now, which I think is
Yeah.
interesting.
No, but it's true. And like they complain about monopolies and everything, and then you bring up the monopoly on education, and they're like,
Mhm.
"Well, that's okay." And it's like,
Right, and
no.
it's for the kids in the community, without realizing that good education will create good members of your community on its own. You don't need to like force that. You learn community in every like school. Yeah, you do learn community, but I also learned community going to religious school, being on a swim team, being involved in theater, just growing up in my community. Like I didn't need school to teach me to be part of a community. I had other things, and there are other things for that. I just the way, and really the way schools are working now, we're spending more money than we ever have, and they're not succeeding. And that's my biggest gripe than anything else. If you had a government program that ever really worked, we wouldn't really be having this conversation. But these government programs don't work. And it's the same with government schooling. They have failed our students. They continue to fail our students. They failed them during COVID. I think even a Zoom class with 10 kids wouldn't have resulted in the catastrophic failure that trying to fit 35 kids that you normally have in a classroom on your Zoom, you
True.
know? And people got to hear what teachers were saying. And it's funny because it does make me think back to school of some different things of, I feel like that might have been kind of propaganda that was pushed on us as well. I mean, I do remember school budget. That was always the big thing. They would tell us if your parents don't vote for the school budget, your programs will be cut, your arts programs, teachers will lose their jobs. And then they passed the school budget and they bought like new school buses that they didn't need. And then they
And
still
they're
cut the
always
arts.
asking for more. I mean,
They
they're always asking for more
Yes,
money.
and they still cut the arts. The year we passed that school budget, I was in Fiddler on the Roof, and we had to cut our musicals from 3 down to 2 shows, and my parents, bless their heart, gave the school $500 so that we could do the show for a third time. I mean,
Tradition.
I was Tevye, so, like, they had their own selfish reasons for doing that, but still, like, it was really nice of them to do it, and it also shows that, that's my other problem with schools, is none of this money always goes to what it says it should go
That's
to.
voluntary giving right there, and the less that we have to
Exactly.
give to where it's sitting in a fucking fund somewhere, if they just they want to give to these things sometimes.
Yeah,
like
that's why I don't support the National Endowment for the Arts, and it's not because I don't think the arts should be funded. Every little theater I have worked at, the people running it will tell you we need the National Endowment for the Arts. None of them get that money. You know who gets that money? The New York Metropolitan Opera and the New York Ballet, all the giant theater, and the San Francisco Opera, all the theaters that have $1 million donors already,
and PBS too, right?
and PBS. God, PBS and NPR. God, if that's NPR is sometimes wild to listen to. It is.
It's been so. I used to listen to it all the time. It used to be like good little stories about pig farmers, and and then
I do it to get out of my bubble. This is actually one of the reasons I'm most excited to campaign and get on and knock on doors is I truly, really want to talk to our neighbors in this district and really find out what their opinions are. And, some of it is I want to know how popular our libertarian ideas are. How much are people thirsting for a third party? Like, is this a thing that we are supposedly seeing in Gallup polls and other polls that Americans do want a third party? They feel like the two parties have failed them and they're desperately looking for something else, and they just don't feel like the candidates really have, third party candidates really are serious enough for them or have the answers. Or is it a case where really people are just stuck in the two party system and they just kind of give this lip service when they're in? They don't know. And we'll find out. I don't think Andrew Yang's forward party is the way forward. Sorry, I don't like the idea. Like New York, for example, has a thing where you can run as a Republican or Democrat, but you can also run on another party's ticket. Okay, that's whatever. I don't like the idea that, well, you can still be a Republican or Democrat and donate money to them, but then you can also be a member of the Forward Party. No, you need to be a party with your own principles, your own ideals.
If we're playing politics, you got to play the politics. You got
to. That's the game, man. But I just don't think that Andrew Yang is as serious as he says he is. And I have no problem against him. I just think he was liked a little bit too much in the Libertarian Party. Like, people both fell in love with Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang has been a disappointment. Tulsi Gabbard has certainly held her own. She actually came to the conservative summit here, and you would think she was a right-wing conservative. She talked about how great guns were, and she talked about how great God was. That blew my mind. This was a woman who ran as a Bernie Sanders Democrat in 2016, and she is like talking about all,
She's playing that. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if Tulsi ran as a independent or a third party candidate as president. I think 2024 could be a really interesting year for president. I mean, theoretically, the Forward Party is going to try and run somebody. I think also Andrew Yang will find out how hard ballot access truly is. I mean, there is in New York, if you want to know how hard it is. So our Libertarian governor candidate in New York, Larry Sharpe, raised $300,000 to get on the ballot. Now the Republicans are trying to kick him off. Funny story, their governor candidate, the Republicans, Lee Zeldin, tried to also run on the independence ticket, something like that. And even he didn't get enough signatures.
Dang.
Yeah.
Ugh. They make it hard.
What I tell any libertarians who are listening to this, move out of New York, man. I get it. I understand. Come to Colorado. We have full ballot access. Like, you want to make another type of free state like what's in New Hampshire?
Yeah, that's what I've been saying. Colorado,
we have New Hampshire, man. Come to Colorado.
We have the hope here. We have it here. We just have to we have a couple things we need to deal with. A governor.
5.5 million people in Colorado. That's not a lot of people. 100,000 libertarians, 200,000 libertarians, and we would start changing the game here completely. We could make the Republican Party ultimately irrelevant in Colorado.
And I think there's a lot of people who would, especially after COVID and seeing the Republicans didn't do anything for them either. And I grew up here, and everybody was like, the liberty-minded attitude was just here. That's just how people are, but you're the duopoly and everything.
I mean, the Republicans sometimes have this where they're just so out of touch. I mean, from what I understand, that's what happened in the early 2000s when the Democrats took over. It was the gay marriage issue that ultimately mobilized the Democrats. And I will say, and I'm sure I will get hate from gay people in the Democratic Party, I think you all sold your soul to the Democrats. The Libertarians have stood by gay marriage and gay people for our literal entire existence as a party. We had Libertarians march at Stonewall. as open libertarians, not like I'm sure there were some Democrats and Republicans who were there, but did not stand up as a party. We stood up and you know, and I'm not saying you have to come and love us and vote for us. All I'm saying is I think the Democrats duped you. And I think they will make you sell your principles on other things, pretending they are the only pro LGBT party in this,
They're
and
not.
they're not
No,
in any
our
way.
culture's way like we are all friends with all sorts of people and we're so cool. So
I
like, come
mean,
on.
the two of us certainly fall on the more wilder side of the Libertarian Party. And then like our current senator who's running, he doesn't smoke marijuana. He's not a consumer in any way. He just thinks people shouldn't get arrested for it. But it's not for him. He doesn't want his kids doing it. It's not at all his thing. And that's fine. So we're on
Yeah.
on opposite ends. He also is a much more pro-life person. So yeah, actually interesting in Colorado. And again, we'll probably get some hate from this, but Brian knows what he's doing. So and Brian is a fantastic candidate. I think Brian
He was
Piotr
my
will.
first interview. I had interviewed
Oh,
him.
really? I think
Yeah.
Brian Piotr will continue to be an all-star candidate in the LPCO for sure. But he is the only actually pro-life candidate for the Senate running right now. And I don't know if that necessarily includes an all-out ban or things like that, but it definitely is interesting, And not all libertarians are pro-life, even in this state. I'll put that out there. Our party is welcoming to people of both of those stances. We do welcome both pro-choice and pro-life, but our party does not take an official stance. And part of it is where you live. We have candidates that are very pro-choice, will never become pro-life, and they live in very pro-choice areas of Colorado. And I would never expect them to become pro-life. We have just opened it up to people who live in more Christian areas who want to be pro-life and want to run as a more pro-life. And it may be one day, where you have an entire Colorado legislature that is all libertarians, and it's an argument that we may have.
Well, I just feel like even if you're a pro-life libertarian, even deep down, you're like, yeah, but I still don't want the government involved.
No, I don't.
Like,
And I've never met a pro-life libertarian who ever wants to arrest the mother or do anything like that.
yeah.
At most, it's the doctor, and even most pro-life libertarians don't even feel comfortable making it illegal. Like we like our vice chair, Hannah Goodman. She is personally more pro-life, but she has never voted to ban abortion here, and she goes and helps women who are pregnant. She tries to give them an alternative. She has had
She's
more
like, you guys are
success.
so busy. She does so much too.
Hannah's an all-star. Hannah will be a future governor of Colorado if it
Yeah.
kills her. But she has found that actually going out and helping people. That's why libertarians are so big on empowering your community. Banning abortion is not going to stop abortion. Empowering people and wanting it to make sure that people are taken care of and people want to help people. And we get in a time of Americans where we're not relying on the government to take care of those women. We're relying on communities. And also pressure fathers. I mean, I will say, as someone who I've dated a decent amount of women who will tell me, you are not necessarily like other men. There are a lot of crappy men in America. You need to turn it around, men. You need to grow up. You need to be good partners. You need to be good husbands. You need to be responsible. And that may or may not meaning becoming head of the household. Depends on your wife. Depends on whatever your, dynamic is. I mean, with Kristen and I, there are some things I do more, some things she does more or whatever, but be a good partner. Don't, like, one thing that has always gone through my mind whenever I've had sex is, am I actually willing to raise a child with this girl? And the answer has always been yes. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of girls, not plenty, there have been a couple girls I've dated, and my thought had been, whew, I'm glad I've never gotten them pregnant. But still, like, this is a biological consequence, and women should not have to be the only ones who suffer. Like, it is really shitty for a man to get a girl pregnant and then just take off.
Yeah.
So we need a more responsible citizenry all around. And I think that comes with everything. And I think if people feel more empowered, like they in their communities, that their communities have more ability to accomplish their own things, their own problems, like the homeless situation. It is not getting solved in Colorado because everyone is assuming the government will solve it. The Denver government has done nothing but make that problem worse.
They make money off of it,
So
for heck's sake.
my fiance always gets mad when we're in the Denver airport, but when you're in the Denver airport, for people who've never been there, there's a little train tram that will take you from terminal to terminal, and you'll always get the, "Hi, I'm Mayor Michael Hancock. Please welcome to our beautiful city." And out loud, I always will say, "And I'm the one who told people to stay home during COVID while I took a personal plane to Louisiana to visit my parents." We have
for
an out and
Thanksgiving.
out communist on the Denver City Council. Like it's just wild. I'm sorry, can't get behind socialism and collectivism and all of that. Do I think capitalists need to be responsible? Absolutely. And people may not realize this, but in the early 1900s, rich capitalists were more responsible. You just don't have like think about in towns. You used to have libraries built, sports centers built, schools. Rich people would just build these things. Hershey, who created, Hershey what we knew, built an entire town for his factory to live in. And nowadays they don't. Rich people rely on the government to do it. We need to get back in this kind of, where it is those people investing in their communities again. And then you can have it around the state as well. Like I get the argument that you have rich parts of the state and poor parts of the state, and what are poor parts of the state supposed to do? But in Colorado, what we find here is that we are an extremely giving state. When every time there's a forest fire, when the forest fire happened a little north of where we are, I mean, clothes were donated,
Oh
thousands
yeah, right
upon thousands
away.
of dollars. Kyle
They had to
Clark,
like turn
who
stuff away.
yeah, Kyle Clark on News 9. I mean, I might hate the guy. I think he is about as partisan as they come as a
He's a
journalist
commie,
pretending
Chad.
not to
He's a
be.
commie.
He is a commie. He's from New York. I don't want to tell you. He's like from Western New York. So I'm sorry about all of us from New York who moved here. But even he has a giving charity where they've raised like $30,000 in food and clothing to give people. And you would think he would learn that this is better than the government from doing this own thing. But, whatever.
He
So
has his marching orders.
I think Colorado will be able to solve its own problems if it relies on itself and not the government.
I love
And
it
it
too.
is
That's how I have the attitude. Everyone's like, "You should just Colorado's gone." And I'm like, "No, it's not. It's not gone." Like,
what
we're
I will
here.
say is you have to stay and fight. New York is gone. That's why I moved out. I moved out when Cuomo got elected. I knew there was just not a lot of hope. I apologize to anyone who's listening from New York right now. It's my own personal feeling. And granted, we have like some family who lives in Astoria, not obviously as dangerous as downtown Manhattan is. But coming from upstate, they're locked in by the city. They have no choice. And I see that happening in Colorado with like Boulder and Denver. And I've already moved once. I found Colorado in 2013 and I fell in love with the state. I would have been one of those people in a snow-covered wagon in the 1800s going out west trying to find another life. I loved the feeling of just independence that you felt in Colorado. Like there is something to be said about, I don't know if it's just the lack of skyscrapers like there are in back out east, but the sky really does seem bigger. Like
Oh, it's
there is
huge.
no way you can't look at the Rocky Mountains and just feel truly blessed in this state. Like I understand why, like I'll talk to people not from Colorado and they'll be like, that's God's country, son. And I understand why they say that. There are just sometimes the way the sun comes through the clouds, it's just nothing like it that anywhere else I've lived. And I don't want to run again. I want to stay and fight. I want to make this place better. And maybe now it's because I am getting married and we want to have kids. And also I found a community. I mean, through the Mises Caucus and the Libertarian Party, I finally really found a community here in Colorado. And you all are such wonderful, amazing people. And I think we can show that to people. And I don't want that. I don't want us to just feel like we have to give up. I will stay and fight for this state. Even if it kills me, I will do it, which hopefully it doesn't, because I want to be a father and a husband. And it's much easier to get a young man to go to war than someone with a family. But it doesn't mean I still won't, and it doesn't have to be fighting with guns, but it can be showing up to the state capitol and telling Jared Polis what a piece of crap he is. The man who goes on these libertarian podcasts saying what a libertarian he is. And maybe when he was in the Freedom Caucus, maybe he was better. But again, someone who sold their soul to the Democratic Party. To be governor, he had to align with everything else. And, he talks a big game. But so he holds crypto events here. Who the hell cares? Anywhere can hold a crypto event. The only thing you let us do with crypto is pay the state our income tax in crypto, which is a brilliant idea on their move. But, who wants to do that? You talk about getting rid of the state income tax, although you don't even support the current ballot measure to lower the state income tax. You say you are a pro-cannabis person, but he's going to support 3 bills that are going up next year, all that are anti-cannabis. Like the growers in Colorado down south are suffering. I mean, this is a market that I put out to any cannabis people. The Libertarian Party are behind you, and if you want allies, we are your only allies. This is one thing talking to Republicans I have learned, and I definitely like. I thought they were kind of past the weed issue. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. And people will be surprised to hear this, there is a concerted effort by both Republicans and Democrats on each side, and if they had their way, they will make cannabis illegal in Colorado again. Mark my words. They have already talked about it. If they could,
especially because
way.
the politics that it kind of brought, the whole like pendulum swing. Yeah, I could definitely see them doing that.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
unfortunately, they just don't separate the cannabis thing from other things. You know, I mean, we push a series of self responsibility. We don't want a cannabis thing where people are just going to be dumb and high, but it has taken people who were poor and made them wealthy in this state. I mean, before it got too corporatized, I remember when someone used to be like, I remember a cannabis store downtown where 3 friends bought an old apartment house, lived upstairs. They had their inventory in the basement, and they sold turned the living room into a thing, and they started their own business, and they went from 3 broke dudes to 3 business owners. And you're gonna just take all of that away. And that's the kind of responsibility and self-promotion I'm trying to do, with the Libertarian Party. Is we're not for drug addicts being strung out on the streets. We are for a responsible community. You just have to learn that what people do in the privacy of their own home that doesn't hurt other people, you just can't do anything about. This is why you can't enforce things like sodomy laws. What are you going to do? Bust into people's houses hoping that they're having butt sex that you can catch them at? Like, no. But yes, if someone is out and is like beating their child, yes, you should do something about it. Like, that is obviously harming someone else. And and throwing people in jail is not going to get them over addiction. And we have to ask too. I mean, the opioid epidemic was a thing before the heroin epidemic was.
Yes,
one led to
and
another.
Denver got a shit ton of money out of it. My friend used to be the city lawyer.
Yeah. I mean, so it's just, this is one thing the Democrats don't do, is they just don't push any sort of self-responsibility along with the things that they push. And the Republicans just feel like, there are some of them who just feel like you just aren't responsible with your own life to us to allow you to do this. And I can't get behind it. It's part of the reason I'm not a Republican anymore. There's certain aspects of social conservatism I'll just never be able to get behind. And what these two parties need to understand is they are just reactionaries. And this is what the right is doing that is a problem. Not like right wingers saying, a lot of Republican right wingers is they are now going so hard against Democrats in what is fairly some very stupid things that they are going to swim the pendulum the other way, and it will only radicalize the people on the left again to then go after the Republicans, and we're going to start this whole freaking process over again. And I'm too old for it, and I'm only 32 years old, and I'm already sick and tired of this crap. Like, I don't want to be my parents when I'm 68 being like, oh my God, what have we done to this country? This whole country is going down the tubes. Like, we need to foster the type of community people felt like they had in the 1950s without the bigotry and racism and laws that, put comedians in jail for saying the F word. Like, that offends me as an entertainer, someone who's in theater, that they used to put people in jail for swearing or saying indecent things in stand-up comedy. That's utterly ridiculous.
And now they'll try and do it if you don't say the woke stuff. Like, it's not on the opposite end.
That's all just so dumb too. I mean, compelled speech is never good. You need to be able to let people speak their mind. And as someone who doesn't like bigoted speech, you need those people to speak so you can learn who the dumb people.
You want to hear who's saying this shit too. Like, why would you
And sometimes it's good to know what they are saying. Like I will say, my fiance had a recent thing with some people where they're like, oh no, libertarians are all psychopaths. Didn't really give any reason outside of public education, but they're just like, libertarians are psychopaths. And you're like, okay, well, at least now I know where there are, and now we can take the conversation from there, or not take the conversation. You're not going to like everyone in this country, but you have to learn to get along with them. It's that thing in work, right, where you don't have to respect everyone that you work with, but you have to be able to work with them. You can't cause scenes with them in front of customers and stuff. And we need to kind of be like that a little bit as a country. We need to be able to learn how to live with people you may not like.
Well, I think that's a good spot to leave it at, Jacob.
Okay. Fair enough. Thanks for having me on.
We'll do it. I mean, we have till when's the election? November?
November 8th is the election,
Yeah.
so definitely go out and
We'll
vote.
have everybody on a
Please.
couple times is my feeling too. So
Awesome. Any libertarians that are listening to this, whether you're in Colorado or not, this is what will make us a better party. And I will admit, as a newer board member this year, is one of the more frustrating parts. And I will say this to everybody, and also the Mises Caucus people, is you all want to get in, you all want to join the Mises Caucus, right? Or join the Libertarian Party because you want to make a difference. You do need to do things to make a difference. That doesn't have to be running for office, but help people. I guarantee you, 10 to 15 people helping a candidate, or even 5 people helping a candidate knock doors, will make a way bigger difference than you think it is. We almost won a 2-way election up in Broomfield where it's all Democrat run, and our candidate Brian Piotr got more votes than
we
any of
door
the
knocked.
Republicans who ran.
Remember, we
Yeah,
were door
because we
knocking.
door knocked and we talked to people. Relate to people, empathize. This is one thing we need to do as libertarians. Life is about how you relate to people. A friend of mine went crazy in college, but he was right. Descartes thought, I think, therefore I am. But that is really not enough. I relate, therefore I am. We relate to everything in life. Figure out how you can relate to your neighbors. That is not necessarily just, saying who Rothbard is. Although Rothbard was great and Mises is great and all these people are great and you should explain these to people, but find out what is bugging them on a personal level. What are their personal pain points and work with them there. Get on their level as a libertarian. If their issue is education, or if their issue is gay marriage, or their issue is whatever, even if you don't know that you can agree with it, find a libertarian way for them to solve it.
That's true. All right. What's your website?
My website is jakeforooffice.com. Nice and easy. Jake4office.com. And my Twitter handle is Jacob, again, number 4, CO House 27.
That's right. Yeah, you changed it.
Yeah, I did change it recently. Instead of starting a new one, it just seemed easier to change it. So,
yeah.
And if you find an old Twitter account, which I deactivated, which should be deactivated, and I was retweeting Tommy Lahren at the time, I've come a long way. Please forgive me.
Love it. Well, thanks for coming on and chatting.
Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.